Hey guys, today we're going to learn how to play Jobava London system. This is a very interesting, dynamic, and entertaining scam that we can play it with white pieces in a queen's pawn with d4 in first move. There are 4 good reasons to play Jobava London. Number 1, the ideas are easy to learn, yet very powerful. Number 2, it is fresh and fun. Fresh means that it's relatively new, and fun means it's dynamic, entertaining, and you're going to get good positions. Very often you're going to be attacking. Number 3, it is perfect for beginners, juniors, experts. In general, anyone can play Jobava London. We have already seen it played among super GMs, but also among club players is totally okay. So anyone can play Jobava London system. And number 4, Black cannot play on autopilot. For example, let me show you something. In this position, if Black plays c5, then we play e3 and Black plays knight c6. White is going to get the advantage, and Black has done nothing out of the natural development moves. They just played c5 and knight c6. Those are totally normal moves. In this position, White can play knight b5. This is very strong because we are getting we are playing knight c7 here, getting material advantage. Actually, they can try something like e5, and well, they can stay in the game, but it's clearly better for White. This means that Black must be very careful when they are facing Jobava London, since there might be hidden ideas, tricks, or threats. About the general idea of this opening, we have 3 main points. Number 1, we're going to play a very natural development on the queen side. Observe how we develop the knight to c3 and the bishop to f4. What's more natural than that, right? Number 2, you want to execute pressure on c7. Observe how in this opening your bishop targets c7 and your knight is also able to go to b5 and put pressure on c7. This idea can be tricky, can be hidden, can be useful and powerful in some specific positions, as the example that we saw some seconds ago. So that's also one idea here. In many positions, we can tie up Black pieces with the pressure on c7 by forcing some knight a6. We're going to see this later in the lines. And this is going to create, in general, or very often, very good positions for White with some middle game advantage. And finally, the third point of the general idea when we play Jobava London is that we want to expand on the king side. Observe that we don't bring the knight to f3, more or less intentionally, because very often we are going to play the move f3 later in the opening or the middle game. And the idea is that we can expand, sometimes with g4, h4, sometimes h5, especially when the bishop is on f5. This is going to be a nice and dynamic idea. But also, even if the bishop doesn't go to f5, very often we are playing h4 and h5, especially when they have the fianchetto over here. Is an idea that we are going to execute on the board. So this means that we want to take some space, attack, be aggressive on the king side, and that's also an idea that we need to highlight for Jobava London. In the video, we're going to have 2 main sections. Section number 1 is when they play with d5 and some of the alternatives that they can try with the pawn on d5. Section number 2 is when they play with d6, g6, bishop g7. Basically, we're talking about a King's Indian setup, the knight, of course, on f6. In the section where they play, where we analyze the move d5, we're going to be highlighting 3 subsections. When the bishop goes outside the chain of pawns, when the bishop is inside the chain of pawns, and when they don't play 6, instead of that, they just play g6, create a fianchetto with the pawn on d5. It's going to be like a Grunfeld scam. This time we're not talking about bishop inside or bishop outside, since they don't play 6, so we don't have a chain of pawn, so it doesn't make sense to talk about it. So basically we're talking about a Grunfeld scam, how to deal with that in Jobava London. That being said, let's get started. Let's learn how to play the interesting, aggressive, dynamic Jobava London. So we're going to play d4. Our opponent is going to play d5. It's one of the most important lines. Here we play knight c3, knight f6, and then this move bishop to f4. And this is the main position of the Jobava London. At this point, our opponent can play bishop outside the chain of pawns, bishop inside, keep it there with e6 directly, or they can just play g6 and continue with a Grunfeld scam. We're going to see the three scams, but let's focus first on this one. It's probably the main line, probably the most common position that we are going to see if we play this more or less often. So after bishop f5, then we have this move f3. In general, after the bishop comes here, we're going to play f3 in these kind of positions, because remember that we want to expand on the king side in this line. The main line is when they play e6, and here of course we play g4, bishop to g6, and then h4. Of course we are trapping the bishop here with h5, so they need to find a solution for this. They can try either a6 or h5. I guess h6 is a little more normal, so let's analyze this. But also, let me tell you, after h5 you can just play g5 here, forcing the knight back to d7. Let's take a look at h6. In this position we are going to play the normal move, pawn to e3. And don't forget this structure here, because we're going to see it more or less often. Also we can play with h5 first, but usually it's a good idea if you keep the pawn here on h4, because you're breaking with more protection, and also this is a move that you can play anytime you want, so there's no rush to play it. So it's a good idea to play e3 first. At this point, probably the best move for black is going to be a6, and we are going to play something like bishop to d3, because this bishop is actually an interesting piece here on this diagonal. But let me tell you something, very often your opponent is not going to play a6, and this is where we are going to take advantage of this scam. Very often they can try something like c5, more aggressive, and they might think it's more interesting, but not really, because this is where we can do or we can execute the idea of putting pressure on c7. So after c5, if we can play knight b5, we're going to play it. We try h5 first, blocking the king side, getting some space, forcing bishop h7, and then this idea, knight b5. Again, I'm going to make a pause here, because we should not forget this. After some c5, not controlling b5, well, this idea is going to tie up black pieces a lot, because now we're threatening this and they need to play knight to a6. Observe they don't have a way to get rid of all this pressure on the dark squares. For example, they cannot bring the rook here because you're always taking there. They cannot move the knight because you're always checking. So in general, this is going to be a good thing. They cannot move the pieces too much. We have a lot of pressure and a lot of control on the queen side. Here we need to play this move, pawn to c3, and this is also a move that we should not forget. The pawn on c3 is really important. First of all, you're preventing knight b4. That's an idea that they can try in some positions. Secondly, you're reinforcing your central pawn. Also, you're opening the diagonal for the queen. Also, you're stopping any kind of check over this diagonal. We can also talk about ideas like knight a3, knight c2, I don't know, later in the middle game or something. If you need to move the knight for some reason, that is going to be available. So it's extremely useful, this move, pawn to c3. We should not forget it. Very important. And at this point, we can say that white is better in this position. Black can play here bishop e7, and bishop d3 again is a move that we need to play, because this bishop is actually a good piece. And after bishop d3, queen d3, I'm not really going to continue with the line after this. I'm just going to tell you the general ideas for the middle game that is coming. Very often we're going to play a4. It's a move that almost always we're going to need, reinforcing our knight on that square. Very often we're going to develop the knight, usually over e2 or h3. There are some ideas where you can retreat your bishop back and bring your knight to f4. And this is interesting because they are both going to be more or less fine. The knight and the bishop controlling squares all over the center and the king side. Also, there are ideas with some breaks on g5, especially if they castle king side. This is going to be always there. And finally, for our king, basically we can make the decision, the most convenient decision depending on the position, like maybe castle queen side, maybe castle king side, or maybe, and also I could say very often or sometimes, we can also stay in the center. Somewhere over here might be playable, just connecting the rooks and getting ready for some initiative maybe on the king side. That can also happen. As this is the main line in Jobava London, I want to show you two super classical games by two very strong grandmasters. The first one is by this master. I don't know if you have heard his name is Badur Jobava. I'm just joking because he's the creator of the opening. I mean, the opening is named after this master. So the first one is by Jobava. So let's see what happens. He's facing Mehmed Jarov. So d4 knight f6, knight c3 d5, and then bishop to f4. At this point, bishop to f5. Then we said we would play f3, and then after e6, we play g4, expanding on the king side. Bishop g6, h4, exactly as we studied, h6, and then e3. Here, black is going to play c5, and we already said that if the pawn is on c5 and they allow knight b5, and this is a real threat, I mean, they have to play knight a6 after knight b5, that's a good thing. It's a good thing that we play it. So here we play h5 first, bishop to a7, and then knight to b5. They are playing knight to a6 here. It's basically the only move. And then c3, as we said, bishop to e7. And also we already studied this move, bishop to d3. Bishop takes, queen takes, and this move knight to d7. Jobava continued here knight to e2, and black castled kingside. a4 is another move that we highlighted and we said is very important for black in these positions, reinforcing the knight. Bishop to f6, but this is weakening a little the dark squares, so Jobava is going to try here bishop to d6. And then after rook e8, they might be planning some kind of break in the center. So this move is really interesting, f4. Observe how we are controlling very well this square because our king is not is in the center. We're not totally sure where we're going to castle. So the king is in the center still. So it's important to make sure they are not breaking over there. At the same time, f4, as you can see, is reinforcing the break on g5. Black plays here knight to b6, and then, boom, break on the king side, sacrificing one pawn but discovering the king a lot. H takes g5, and then h6. g6, pawn takes, bishop takes, and then check. We want to make sure the king doesn't block that pawn. Black plays here king to g7, and then bishop to e5 check, and then after f6, this move knight to d6. The attack is really strong. We are taking the rook on e8, and also we are promoting after that, probably getting the queen. So knight d6, black is playing here rook to h8, and then this move knight to f4. After bishop takes, g5, this strong idea, castle queenside, because we need the rook over here to continue with the attack, to help in the attack, to reinforce our ideas. Black plays here knight c4, and then at this point there is a spectacular move. At this point there might be some ways to win for white actually, but the move that Jobava found here is really spectacular, it's really brilliant, and I'm going to say it very soon. It is the amazing rook to h6. Basically, you're threatening mate in 2 with queen g6, queen f7, for example. And, well, if they accept the rook, that's the line that we have in the game. You can just fork, get the queen, and win with material up. We're going to see it. But also we should say, for example, if they take the knight here on d6, then we don't have that line with mate in 2. However, we have other things. For example, we can play queen check, king f8, bishop takes knight. The idea is that we want to get this pawn here, so after queen takes d6, queen takes f6, king e8, queen takes rook. And of course, this is going to be winning for white. So after rook a6, Mehmed Jarov took the rook, and then the fork, and then king here, and then the queen, and then the rook takes the knight, and well, at this point b3, knight b6, rook g1, rook takes a7. This is winning for white already. It's just a matter of finding some good moves. e4, king h8, e5, and here, well, the bishop is hanging, but that's not a real problem, since after queen g6 we are threatening checkmate very soon over here. And after rook to f8, e takes f6, and this is game over. Jobava won the game since Mamedjarov resigned. The reason he resigned is that there is this threat pawn to f7 with the idea of mate here or here, and there's not much they can do against that. Also after f7, if the rook takes, there is rook h1, or if the rook takes, again there is queen e8. The other example is by Daniel Naroditsky, and here we have d4, d5, knight c3, knight f6, and after bishop f4, bishop f5, bishop outside the chain of pawns, c3, e6, g4, bishop g6, h4, and then h6. Then we said we could play e3 here, and in this game, instead of c5 or a6, those are moves we have already talked about, black is going to play bishop to d6, also totally playable, also totally natural option for black. In the game, we have knight g to e2. It's another idea that we should keep in mind, because very often after the trade, we can take back with our knight, attacking that bishop, and we continue with the ideas of expansion on the king side. Black plays here a6, bishop takes d6, queen takes d6, and then knight to f4. This square is a typical position that we can use for our knight. Knight c6, knight takes g6, and there is the check, queen e3. We're going to talk about the check a little because it looks like a huge problem, but actually not at all. It's not a problem at all here. Daniel Naroditsky played here king to d2, and this is totally okay. The idea is that he's going to develop the bishop, he's going to develop the queen, and actually the king it's a good thing that the king is not here, because he can bring the rook over here to the king side, and the rooks are linked, and everything is going to be fine. So this check, as we were saying, is not a problem. White is fine in this position. F takes g6, and then bishop to d3, taking here with check. White castles, there is queen to e2, and black is playing here g5, h takes, rook u1. The queen goes back to d6, and well, let's make a pause here very quickly. This position looks very good for white. Observe how our rooks are very strong on the king side. We have also a very good bishop. Our king is totally safe here on d2. We can also move to the queen side if we need, and also the queen is able to move to the h file, h2, or maybe h3 at some point. So we could say that white is much better at this point. The game continues with f4, expanding even more, opening lines. G takes f4, and then this move g5, because the knight is a key defender in this position. We want to get rid of the knight. After knight e4, there is bishop takes e4, d takes e4, and then boom, queen to h5. We have ideas here like g6 mating net with queen h8. This is really hard to stop. We can say that it's actually unstoppable. So white is winning here with this idea. Of course, black has some threats, some ideas with a check over here, some capture over there, but this is never going to be checkmate. That means that they have nothing good enough over here, as we have made very soon over here. So that's exactly what happens in the game. F takes e3, we hide the king behind the pawns, queen takes d4, and then boom, g6, creating the mating net and winning the game. This check was played in the game, but is useless. After king b1, black resigned. There's no way to escape from the checkmate threat. So let's take a look at the line where black keeps the bishop inside this chain of pawns. So d4, d5, knight c3, knight f6, bishop to f4, and then e6. It could be like this. At this point, we can actually continue with a normal development. We have to say that in general, this should not be so dangerous. I mean, what is dangerous about this? The bishop, instead of being outside the chain of pawns active, is inside passive. So apparently there's nothing to worry about. However, we should say that the line is interesting, and it's maybe a little better than it seems to be. I'm going to show you a game as an example of how to deal with this. And this game was played by Antoaneta Stefanova. In this game, she plays e3, and then after bishop to d6, there is this move knight to f3. At this point, there is bishop takes f4, e takes f4, and b6. We should talk a little about this structure here that we have right now. And we should say that there's nothing wrong with this. This is totally okay. These double pawns are totally fine. Observe how we are controlling the square e5 very well. And also they don't have a dark squares bishop. So this bishop is blocked by these pawns. So in general, this position is fine. We have a good central control. So nothing to worry about these pawns like this. After b6, we are going to play knight e5. In the game, black castles. And Stefanova plays queen to f3. Very aggressive. Early in the game, the queen goes to the kingside ideas with queen h3, bishop d3, g4, g5. The knight on e5 is good. And also we can castle queenside anytime we want. Bishop to a6 was played, castle queenside, and then queen c8. Here this move, g4. We continue with this aggressive approach. Bishop to b7, probably trying to bring the knight to the center of the board, but then there is bishop to d3, c5, and g5. Now we are controlling very well here, so the knight cannot go to the center. Knight f to d7, and well, as you can imagine, this move, queen to h3, too much pressure on a7. Actually, we should say something. At this point in the game, Stefanova missed a huge opportunity. There was some kind of Greek gift sacrifice here, some kind of winning sacrifice, and starting with bishop takes h7, white could win the game. After king takes, the idea is that we can play check, and then after king g8, there is this idea. Rook lift, just winning the game. Rook d3, knight e5, for example, rook h3, and we are threatening mate. Probably the only thing they can try is f6, and then we just take the knight. And for example, f takes g5, f takes g5, and the idea again, g6, mating net and mate. So queen e8, for example, g6. So yeah, that was that fantastic idea here with bishop takes a7. However, what happens in the game is also good. Probably not as good, but it's also fine. So queen h3, and black is playing here pawn to f5, trying to block the bishop a little. Probably g6 was slightly better. And then g takes f6, en passant, knight takes f6, rook h1 is very clear. c4, and at this point, a really interesting combination. Rook sacrifice on g7, destroying the defense. And after king takes g7, of course, rook g1 check. And then after king h8, Stefanova plays knight g6. We should say that actually queen h6 is winning faster because we're threatening mate here, but sometimes if the rook moves, you mate here, or if the queen moves, you mate here. So queen h6 is just winning the game no matter very soon. This line knight g6 also wins, and also with check, that's a good thing. After king g7, knight e7 check. It looks like we're getting the queen, but not really, because actually she's going to play the idea of queen h6 at this point. After rook a7, another check, and after king g8, another check. The idea is that if the king goes to the corner, we mate here. So black resigned at this point. So that's the idea for this line of the bishop inside the chain of pawns. I think it's a very instructive example that is going to make more or less clear how to play in this kind of positions. Just natural development, but stay aggressive. Finally, in this section of the lines where black plays pawn to d5, we should take a look at g6. And here we are going to continue with e3. g6, that they are basically trying a Grunfeld approach here. This is structure. It's something we see in Grunfeld defense. So that can happen, but we have some interesting ideas if black plays like this. For example, they play bishop g7, and we're going to be aggressive. Early in the game, we're going to be aggressive one more time. We have this move, pawn to h4. And this move looks like harmless. Like, what is white doing with this? I mean, where is he going? There's nothing here. This is totally controlled. So what is happening here? So that's why the most normal move here for black is going to be castle kingside. And here we have a surprise. But also, let me tell you something, because we should know how to deal with the best moves in the position. So if your opponent plays h5, it's probably one of the best options for black. And here we're just going to continue with a normal development. We're going to play here knight to f3, and they have some weakness here on g5. That's a good thing. We can use it with the knight or with the bishop later. We have natural development. The position is equal. We don't have any big advantage or anything. Just normal position to play some good chess, dynamic, entertaining, and well, the best player should win the game. But if they castle, as I said, this is the most common line, the move that you're going to face more often. You're going to play this move, h5. And again, this looks like, what is he doing? Why is this a good thing? I mean, just knight takes h5. White pieces are, most of them, on the first rank. There's no danger here. Well, in this position, actually, there is a fantastic move. Rook takes knight, exchange, sacrifice, and then after pawn takes, queen takes pawn. And this position, let me tell you, is decisive advantage for white. As surprising as it sounds, in this position, white is winning. Of course, it's not totally clear at first glance, but let me tell you what's the plan. You're going to play bishop d3, you're going to play knight to f3, you are going to castle if you need, so the rook can also help. You are going to play g4 if your opponent plays f5 to stop or block your bishop. And basically you're going to be won. Of course, you're not going to trade queens. At some point, the queen can come over here or can come over here, and we are never going to trade queens. We need the queen on the board to take advantage of the discovered black king. Also, we have some pressure here right now, so usually they should defend with e6 or sometimes with c6. So yeah, that's the idea. And as I said, we're winning. It's decisive advantage. Of course, we should play good moves. It's not like totally clear for a human eye, but at the same time, you can think of this position like you have a really, really, really strong attack here. You can think of this like that. Well, let me show you the ideas on the board. Black plays here e6, you play here bishop d3. If black plays here f5, preventing the threats, you can play knight f3. I'm just going through the main line. I mean the most common line that I can see on Lichess databases, like the move that you're going to face more often. That's what I'm doing right now. Your opponent can play queen f6, and you're going to castle queenside. Your opponent can play here queen g6. And of course, we're not trading queens. We already mentioned this. So we can just retreat the queen. h2 is probably one of the best options. You have pressure on c7. You have a very good control of e5. So queen h2 is fine. Black plays here knight d7. And then there's this move. Fantastic, brilliant idea. g4. Basically, you want to open this file. You want to create weaknesses here and here. If the pawn goes there. And, well, actually, once you open the g5, the rook coming over there should be decisive. At the same time, let me tell you, if your opponent plays queen takes g4, you're going to play knight to g5. And here, white has like, I don't know, 100 threats, let's say. For example, here you're threatening checkmate here. That's clear. Also, you're taking this pawn here. That's also more or less clear. At the same time, we can say that you're threatening pawn to f3, the queen is trapped, so you're getting the queen. Or bishop to e2, again the queen is trapped. Or finally, we can say rook g1. One more time, the queen is trapped. So if you can get into this position, actually, it should be an easy win. So that's section number 1, how to deal with the pawn on d5. Let's go to section number 2, how to play against the King's Indian setup, like d6, g6, knight f6, bishop on g7. How to play in these positions, because your bishop is going to be on the 4. Probably anyone could say, well, the bishop is not so good in these lines because it's like restricted by the pawns. Maybe black is playing e5 or something. So we should learn, or we should know how to play in those positions. But actually we have some nice ideas against this. So let's see. d4, knight to f6, knight c3. Let's say your opponent plays g6 here. At this point, we're going to play bishop to f4. Also, you can play 4 if you want, because actually black has nothing better than bringing the pawn to d6 already. And also with c4, you're preventing any Grunfeld approach. So bishop f4, bishop g7, and then this move, pawn to e4. Black has nothing better than d6, and then we can continue with queen d2. Basically here we are playing like some kind of burst defense by black, and we're playing like a 150 attack by white, but the bishop, instead of on e3, this time is on f4. So yeah, it's still a very interesting position. Of course, this is very aggressive by white, and the plan is one more time is more or less clear. You want to play bishop to h6, and you want to attack on the king side. In some positions you can also play e5 because your bishop is on f4, and this is something that we should highlight. As your bishop is on f4, the options with the break on e5 are extremely playable, and this is something that we don't have so much in the positions with the bishop on e3. So let's see what happens here. Let's say black castles kingside, we can castle queenside, and after something like a knight d7, for example, actually let me tell you, this is the most common move according to Lich's databases. But for example, if they play c6, it's another normal move here, wanting to expand, you can just play bishop to a6. This position is very good. This plan is very clear almost always. Also, if they play, for example, knight to c6, we can play this move, pawn to f3, reinforcing your central pawn, expanding on g4, and again we have ideas like bishop h6, pawn to h4 or h5, and we should never discard a break on e5 because it can always be played in these lines. And finally, the line with knight d7, as I said, is the most common move in these positions. Well, here we are going to continue with e5, and this position is already very interesting and already good for white, like we are better here. Well, after d takes e5, for example, I'm going to follow the most common options here for black. Let's say, well, d takes e5, we just play d takes e5, and they might try something like this, thinking that they are in a good position because they are taking the bishop. Also, they have pressure here in the center. Well, actually here we just play bishop to a6, and this position is very good for white. One of the main problems is the knight on the edge of the board, so very often we are playing g4. Common move here is pawn to a6, and well, if this happens, we are just playing g4 here. The knight is trapped. They might try bishop takes a6 to save the knight, but then after queen takes a6 and then knight to g7, we have some moves, but this one is really good, knight e4. And here we are threatening knight g5, for example, was made, but also there are other ideas like, I don't know, rook takes d7 with knight f6, and so basically it's decisive advantage for white. The attack is unstoppable, and white is winning here. So I encourage you to play this Jobava London system. It's really dynamic, entertaining, and aggressive. Be creative. If you play it in your games, don't be afraid to attack, expand on the king side. If you have any question, let me know in the comments. Check out this video over here. I'm sure you will enjoy it. Thank you guys. Like, subscribe, play the right move. See you on the next.